Welcome to the Suncoast Spotlight webinar streaming on YouTube and Facebook. Today, we want you to go ahead and make a scene, and we'll show you how with a Cinematography 101 crash course. Discover the best practices and techniques for creating compelling videos. From lighting and lenses to composition and exposure, we'll teach you how to create the perfect scene. Feel free to ask questions by submitting them in the comments section. Don't forget to include your name and your school or station. And now, here's your moderator, Jim Garashi.
Hello, hello, hello. Hello, everyone. I am Jim Garashi. I'll be your moderator today. I'm executive producer at Beacon TV, the Broward Education Communications Network. I oversee a few shows for them, School Duel, which is a high school game show, as well as Broward Teen News, and Shortcuts, which is a student film show. But my background comes from behind the camera, behind the lens. So, cinematographer, camera operator, and first AC, and a variety of things. So I'm really looking forward to today. I've got some great panelists with me, one of which is Omar Delgado. He is known throughout the nation, an incredible educator, incredible program. I can't overstate what incredible things him and his students do at Columbus High. Hello, Omar.
Hello, everybody. How are you? Thanks for having me.
So, and also Michael Anderson. He's the director of production services at WLRN, but probably one of those multi-tools that wears a lot of hats, I'm sure, over at WLRN, correct?
Yes, Jim. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me as well.
Great. So we're really looking forward to this. You know, we think we created a lesson here or a webinar that is good mix for beginners and also the more advanced. So we'll touch on a bunch of things. So it should be helpful for a bunch of you. My goal pretty much is to just kind of have you start thinking like a cinematographer, making decisions. You know, I always use the word deliberate. I want you to be a deliberate filmmaker or broadcast journalist or camera operator or cinematographer, all of those things. So, and also we're going to go through a lot. Some will be more technical than others. So if you have questions, please reach out in the chat and put your questions out there, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. And if there's something you don't understand as we go, please, now's not a time to be shy. Now's the time to learn. So what do you say we get started?
Let's do it.
Excellent.
So just briefly, we're going to touch on a few different areas. We're first going to talk about framing, which obviously cinematographers deal with. We're going to talk about focus and depth of field and variety of lenses that you make choices with. We're going to get into lighting a little bit and exposure on your shots, because that matters. And if time permits, we might even touch a little bit into equipment and recommendations and talk a little bit about that. All right, so let's get started with framing. Now, I like to use the word framing when describing it as opposed to shot composition, because I want you to think when you're setting this up that you should be able to pause your tape at any time or your file at any time, print it out, put it in a picture frame, and hang it on the wall because it looks so good or has that much of an emotional impact on someone. So framing basically shots are all about composing and composition. Rather than pointing the camera at the subject, you need to compose an image. Framing is the process of creating composition. We make choices on our shots. So the three that we have there on the first slide is your basic rule of thirds with the girl on the top left corner looking up, putting the eyes on the top third, which we'll talk a little bit about rule of thirds in a little bit. We got a little still frame from, what is that? Life of Pi. Yeah, and using the PowerPoints and that rule of thirds to kind of fill that frame in an interesting way. And then I brought the one on the bottom left as a really good example of using other elements while you're framing. And we got some foreground elements out of focus that really, frame up the shot and send your eyes directly to the subject, which is, what we're trying to do, right? So Omar, how much time, and just real quick, Omar is going to really be a good perspective from, dealing with students in the classroom and knowing what you guys are dealing with, where Michael's going to be more in that professional realm and how he approaches situations. So Omar, how much time do you spend on framing with your students?
I don't think I ever stop. It's a constant lesson. Being a high school teacher and doing this for 16 years, you get the kids for 4 years. So it's kind of like, it's never ending. It's almost like a sports team where you start off freshman year, and by the time they're seniors, they know what they're doing a little bit, but you're still teaching the freshmen. So it's kind of it goes on and on. It just never ends. But if you went through my program for 4 years, I like starting off with photography because, like what you said, you want to, if you know how to take pictures and you hang it up on the wall, the video side just comes natural right after that because you're looking for that picture within your video, right? So I like to have my students take photos, and I can see who has an eye naturally for that, and then I'll build off of those talented students. I currently have a senior, Jordan Perez. I honestly think he might be one of the best cinematographers in the country right now as a senior, and he just has it naturally, right? And I see a bunch of freshmen now. They come up to him and they ask him questions like about framing, about rule of thirds, all that stuff. And I see my seniors teaching my freshmen. I think that's a good starting point. But it all starts with that one picture, and that's where you grow from that.
Yeah, and I like how you said, there's people that are born with an eye. That there's no getting around that. But a lot of it can be learned too. It's a skill as well. But I like to just remember, this is an art field. We're in the arts, so we want to create art. We want to create something to have emotional impact on people, as well as tell information sometimes. So, and the framing of the shots really important. So we're going to move on to now, rule of thirds, which is your basic. They teach this for painters follow this. They've been doing this since forever because it works psychologically and emotionally. So rule of thirds. And briefly, it's by placing main elements in the subject of the PowerPoints, we create a more balanced photograph and engage the viewer more readily. So, and basically it's breaking up the frame into thirds vertically and horizontally. And at those 4 points where they meet, that's what we're going to call our PowerPoints. It's just psychologically where our mind works. It also creates a more pleasing, aesthetically visual to the eye. So, some rules work, right? And this does. So, the top left is your standard interview. Again, a general rule of thumb, I tell students, eyes in the top third. Eyes in that top third line, no matter how wide or tight, you're going to be in the ballpark good enough, and that's a really good. Now, sometimes we break these things, but as a general rule of thumb, eyes on the top third. And that also gives us some lead room of where they're looking, because subconsciously, when someone's looking in a direction, as a viewer, we're curious, where are they looking? And if you place them in the middle or towards the left and blocking them off, well, it's claustrophobic, right? We're not being able to see, and it's uncomfortable subconsciously, right? I like the one on the top right here with the boy looking at the camera, because a lot of students would probably have put him in the center and probably blocked that little girl in the shot. Just that little move to the left fills up that frame. We want to fill that frame with engaging stuff, but we still know that person on the right is our main target because he's looking dead into the, and then the bottom, there's choices we make, right? We're deliberate. We make choices. So that climber, this person chose to put them on the right and let the sky and the sunlight be the main, the balancing on the other side. There's an argument that you could put the climber on the left and have the rocks, depending on what you're trying to say in your image. So, Michael, well, actually, let's start with Omar real quick. How do you stress rule of thirds with your students?
Well, first of all, the grid on the DSLRs, when you're a young shooter, so if you're in middle school or freshman or sophomore, I think that's a necessity. I'm going to be honest with you. I've been shooting for a while, and I still use the grids because why not? It's an easy cheat code for me, like why not have that there? I'm sure I could probably still frame it without it, but rule of thirds is something that it doesn't come natural to a lot of people. But once you get the idea of it, you can start playing with it. And I love what you said about the rock climber. It's all on the storytelling. The rule of thirds helps you tell that story. Like if we're talking about an early morning rock climber, that's the perfect shot, right? But if you're talking about the difficulty of the challenge of climbing the rock, you might want to show the rock more than the beautiful background. And that rule of thirds really helps you tell what kind of story you want to tell. Like this kid in the playground, he might be a fun-loving kid, and his sister is part of that story. You need that sister in that shot, and you want to see that kid smiling. That's a perfect frame. And then the gentleman that's probably a musician. I mean, this is just the way my brain works. I try to teach, always move your rule of thirds. So if you have an interview on the left, try to make the next one on the right, just to keep the brain active. So I'm seeing these two on the right, and it's driving me crazy. But it's framed perfectly, and those grids really do help a lot.
I love that you said it, because you're right. It's more, yeah, it's information, but it's also the tone and feeling of the shot. Like that climber, maybe this story is more about, motivation and inspiration. Well, that sun is really doing that, as opposed to the challenge, which might have been more of the rocks, and to be honest with you, framed like that, it's a little uncomfortable because he is being shoved to the right a little bit. So yeah, these tones and these things matter. And these are the choices. This is what we're trying to do. Right. So Michael.
Yeah, I'll jump in there right quick.
Yeah.
Omar stole exactly what I was about to say. It's I feel it's really about with the framing and also the rule of thirds, but storytelling, and really looking at your shot and thinking about what you're trying to convey in the shot, not just in the actual main part of the shot and lining that up, with the lines and using those tools, but also thinking about the foreground and the background and really what's in the shot and how that helps tell you your overall story, and what you're trying to do. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to put all of these images together to tell a story. And so, you let one frame leads to the next frame. And that's, as far as lining eyes up and having good composition, that really helps when you go into editing. And when you take that and you cut to the next scene, it looks smooth. The transitions and the cuts between each other are very smooth and they're not jarring. And that's because you're lining eyes up. If you have things on different levels, when you cut, there's very obvious cuts. It's jarring to someone that's watching. And the more you jar their thinking, the more they probably turn off their TV or phone or whatever they're watching it on. So
Michael, it's funny you say that because, and I know Jim is going to agree with this, but one of the things that I have to unteach is like jump cuts, right? And using the rule of thirds and, trying to go wide, medium, tight with these grids, it really helps with those transitions and doesn't make it as jarring, because I agree with you. A lot of what we do as cinematographers, you're kind of playing with your audience, like you're playing with their psyche, because you're using little tricks and stuff to keep them entertained.
Absolutely.
I really believe that cinematographers are just as important as the editor and the storytelling process, because you can tell stories just with your images. And if you are a really good cinematographer, it makes the editor's job so much easier, because the pictures tell more more of a story than any words can ever do.
You're basically editing in the camera, because that's all they have to work with, right?
100%.
So I like that. I was going to ask Michael about when to break the rules. Kind of touched on that. We make decisions on what we're trying to do. that climber didn't have lead room, right? We're breaking those rules to an extent, but we're doing it for a reason. I put this slide up here because it's a real good example of, how just a little move, a little pan left or a little step to the left can make all the difference in the world. Now, the first shot's not terrible on the left, but we're cutting that guy in half. And it's just that slight move of seeing the whole frame, filling it with interesting stuff. That's what we're trying to do, and don't move your feet, you just keep moving. So, all right. Backgrounds and foregrounds, we want to obviously avoid distractions. If you look in the top left, I can't tell you how many times things like this happen, with things growing out of their heads. I've had a shot a student took where a plane kind of flew right through someone's ears and out the other side of the head. I didn't listen to a word that interview was being said. I just watched the plane. But we have to look at all of that inside our frame. So it's not just the person and the subject. It's the foreground and background. And next to that as well, that's a busy background with him shoved up against that bush. With everything in focus, it's just very distracting. Now, beyond that, we also want to look for beautiful, interesting things and cohesiveness to the theme. We've already talked about that, what we're trying to tell in our story. There's opportunities out there that we need to keep our eyes open for. So the top one, we've got some leading lines of the girl. We use that side, just moving up against that wall, and all those tiles, or I'm not exactly sure what those are, mailboxes. All those lines push us right to the subject. It's a really interesting shot. I'd even say it has motion in it. I love this one in the middle with the barbed wire. That's from a story by Steve Hartman. It's a news story, a feature story. He's fantastic, by the way.
The goat. Yeah.
The goat. So this is on a grandmother who goes into prison and works with the students. So he talks about the contrast between this little old grandmother and this hard prison. And that establishing shot using that foreground of the barbed wire as they're establishing that we're in a prison, that's huge. And it's in focus too, the barbed wire. I mean, so we're looking for these opportunities to frame up a shot that push our stories along in their cohesiveness, in their feelings. Remember, it's all about emotions. And then the bottom is where you got more of a symmetrical shot, Wes Anderson, with the Army guys on the left and right, again, more with those leading lines leading towards that center character. So, Omar, why are backgrounds of your frame shots so important? I'm sure you've seen quite a good and bad.
Well, dealing with younger, like unprofessionals, the two things I try to always tell them is don't shoot in front of a wall. It's not helping your, it's not helping you. And listen, older, more professional videographers and cinematographers can do what I'm about to say. But if you're young, avoid shooting into a window. Like, don't put your subject in front of a window, unless you have the gear for it, and unless you have the know-how of how to deal with your gear, don't do it.
Why is that?
Because you're either going to get a perfect background, or you're going to get in a silhouette, or you're going to get a perfect person and a blown out background. It's not going to work shooting in front of a window. But it's funny. My wife, who's awesome, and I hope she's watching right now, she's starting her TV production, and I helped out her kids on the summer, and everything was in front of walls or their bulletin boards and stuff. And I was like, the number one thing I would be like, look, what do you see in that shot? They're like, oh, the bulletin board. I was like, great, move your camera 3 feet to the right and shoot this same shot at an angle. And they're like, oh, that's so much prettier. And it's kind of like that top right, the little girl on the top right with I guess those are mailboxes. It just adds depth of field. And again, being a cinematographer and a videographer, you're playing mind games with your subjects. Like, you're literally trying to give them something beautiful to look at so that they can pay attention to the words and the story that's being told. You are so much in part of that process. So your foreground and your background has to tell a story. Like the grandmother going in there, I know that's a jail or a prison or something just because of that one shot. Not one word has to be spoken because of that. So it helps enhance your story so much if you can use your environment and the angles that you shoot in. It really enhances your storytelling ability.
And it's funny, a lot of kids, when they think about these creative shots and all, they think film. It's not film. It's broadcast journal. It's everything we do. We're trying to find a creative, interesting way to present it, right? And add to that emotion and that information to the scene.
It's storytelling.
Yeah.
It's film, broadcast, whatever. It's storytelling. That's what it is.
Yeah. And when you enter a room and you have to do an interview, you have to get shots, I start scouting immediately. Where can I put them? So, Michael, what do you look for in backgrounds, or for that matter, foregrounds, when you're looking to where you can position someone for an interview or even B-roll shots?
Yeah, on that topic right there, I'll just step back to, I think we're always learning, right? We're always going into a location and scouting it and seeing where we could set up our camera, what's the best lighting, what's the best framing, what area would be the best. Speaking about shooting in front of a window, I had a shoot one time and we went, that's how you learn, right? You make these mistakes and you learn. So we had a shoot in front of a window, and we walked in, the view from the window was beautiful. We felt it would tell our story and what we needed, just the background itself, just setting up the background before our interview subject even came into frame. So the background was really great and everything. And then when we brought our interview subject into the scene, now we started adjusting lights and trying to make it set up for the interview subject for more in the foreground and bring them to the focal point and have the background a little blurred, but still a part of the subject. Well, the background was way too bright. We're dealing with the Florida sun, and it was, noontime. And so it was not the best time to shoot. So what I would just say is, like, really planning and looking at your environment, looking at your background, again, storytelling. What is the most important point you're trying to convey in this frame, and really trying to frame it up the best you can to give it that, but always studying, learning, observing your area, just and keeping all of those thoughts in your mind as you go.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about planning a little bit more, because I always say 80% of your work should be in pre-production. So we're going to kind of hurry along a little bit. So let's talk about, we want a variety of shots. It makes it easier to edit. It's a more engaging scene, all of that. So you've got a close-up of the man's eyes. You've got an over shoulder of the girl with the coffee over the shoulder. We've got an eye level shot of the boys under the blanket, but we're down at their level, not looking down at them. And then you got your wides, your mediums, your close-ups. And I love this shot from on the bottom right. It's from Do the Right Thing, a Dutch angle, which is that's when you tilt it on the axis and the horizon, low angle. You know, there's intensity in this scene, and it's added with the way it's shot and the way it's framed. You know, don't shoot everything from your eye level as a camera operator. That's where most people see the world normally. It's run of the mill. Now, listen, there's some informational shots. There's some things you can get there, but we want to see different perspectives, and not only different perspectives, but different perspectives with a purpose. Like that shot of Down with the Boys. We want to get to their level as they're reading this book. We don't want to look down on them. We don't want to judge them, right? We want to get down at their level. And same thing, you know, with that low angle looking up, Dutch angle from Do the Right Thing. This is with a purpose. It's adding to the feeling of the scene of what we're trying to do. Let's use those two boys. Maybe this is a story on these two boys and how they work well and they love each other. Well, that's how we frame it, on their level, with them being with together. We don't look down at them. We take it off the tripod. We do whatever we need to do. And I always recommend personally, and you guys might disagree, but especially with students, a good rule of thumb, 25% wide shots, 25% medium shots, 50% close-ups, because that's where the emotions are, right? But you need a variety so that it edits together well. Let's move on. Unless you want something to add, let's move on to real quick something that to deal with often, which is interview framing, right? This sounds pretty run-of-the-mill, but it's very, very important, right? So we follow rule of thirds unless we decide to break it for a reason, but there should be a reason. So again, the guitar guy, but also if you notice that in the guitar shot, that guitar on the bottom is positioned there. That's part of that rule of thirds and filling out that frame and the balance. You know, again, we go tighter, still those eyes on the top of the frame on the boy, guy with the hat. We keep those eyes and you'll be fine, right? And then this is two shots. We have two cameras with the wide and the close up, but it's still following those same rules and paying attention to the backgrounds, right? So, Omar, real briefly, because you kind of touched on it when you put people against the wall, why is distance important in your backgrounds and even in the foreground where you put the camera? Well, how does that help you?
Well, it's not only distance. I believe it's lighting as well. You want to create depth. You want people to feel comfortable when they're watching something. If you're in front of a wall, like to me, I just feel like I'm in a jail cell. Like, you know, like I'm feel constricted, like watching what it is. But if you give them depth, you bring them into the shot. Which, to your previous shot, the importance of angles. You know, you want different angles because I tried to teach my students. If you want to bring someone in to what you're saying, like you're about to bring them into an interview, start wide, go medium, go tight. And they don't even realize it, but now they feel like they're being brought in. And if you're I'm not a film guy, but I would assume this is the same thing. If you want someone to feel distant, you want to start tight and then go wider. People don't realize it, but like their emotions are being played with just by the visuals they're seeing. The same thing with the interview shots. Like if you're in front of a white wall, you're going to feel uncomfortable. But if there's a guitar in there, or let's say the gentleman on the top right is saying something really intense and you bring it in, you're going to feel that intensity, right? Whatever this woman is talking about, and I have no idea, but she just looks professional and she has a very calming atmosphere. So I'm assuming that she's going to try to teach me something, but in a very nice, calm way. And I have not heard one word of what she's saying. So the way you interview and what you're doing with your background really makes a difference on how you feel.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about lighting that can influence as well. But, and also with the distance, you can control depth of field a lot easier and really have some control but you need that distance for that depth of field, right?
Sure.
So, which leads us right into our next subject, which is depth of, I'm sorry, one more. I had to put this in here. Omar's already shaking his head. We won't go too much into it. You talk about breaking the rules. There's this trend in documentaries where we've got these short-sighted and there's just odd framings. Thoughts?
Michael, you want to take this one? Or
Yeah, I sometimes you break the rules, maybe to help tell your story, right? Whatever you're trying to convey, or you're already thinking about your edit. Maybe it has multiple interviewees, and you want to cut and have the story go between those two. Maybe it's a banter back and forth, I don't know, a yin and a yang, and a positive negative kind of thing. And you're trying to build tension, or you may just use it in many different ways, I think, when it comes to some of this framing. Now, the one, there to the right with Henry Louis Gates, that's pretty extreme, I would say,
So,
with that. And I know it's done at times. And at the shot at the top in the background showing so much headroom and so much of that background, but maybe that's a part of the story. Maybe that's probably what's trying to be conveyed in that. And it's hard to just look at one single shot and make your opinion on one shot. I think you have to take everything as a whole to make a better decision. I thought about it all.
But I'm willing to bet there's some stress and some things in these documentaries. There's no other reason why to do it, right?
Well, you said it, Jimmy. Those are documentary shots. It's a film, and in a film, one of the things I tell my students, there's no rules. You do what you think is going to convey your feelings the most. But for a broadcast journalist, teacher, that just makes it just hurts inside. It just hurts inside so much. But for a documentary film, I'd be like, all right, that's how you want it, because it's art. It's art. So you got to do what makes you feel right.
All right, so let's move on to depth of field focus, getting to more little techie kind of stuff where I love to be. So depth of field is the distance between the nearest and farthest objects that are in focus, right? And focus is by distance. So if someone's 8 feet away from me and I set my focus on my lens to 8 feet, that person should be in focus. But there's an area that will still be acceptable focus that we can control, right? So, and we want to control, we make decisions, we control all kinds of things. So how do we manipulate that depth of field? You can go to the next slide. So there's 3 basic ways. The distance between the camera and the subject. The closer you are, the shallower the depth of field. The farther away from the subject that you're trying to be in focus, the wider. Think of it this way. I use this as a good example. Like the Grand Canyon, you're setting 100 feet away is in focus. Well, all of it's going to be in focus for the most part, as opposed to a really tight shot of a bug on a leaf that you're really up close with, where you're going to have a really shallow depth of field. Great, easy way to remember. Focal length as well, that the telephoto, how much you're zoomed in or zoomed or wide in your lens. So as you zoom in, the depth of field gets shallower. And as you zoom out, wider shots, more in focus and so forth. So these are kind of common sense, how your mind would think. But then we get into where we really can control it for the as well. And that's, on the camera and its aperture, or what I like to call the iris. And it's measured in f-stops. I use iris because I want you to think of your eyes and the pupils in the eyes and how they open up and close and let in more light and less light. So that will affect your depth of field. A good way to remember this, even though it's not technically correct, but a good way to remember this is the lower the f-stop number, the shallower the depth of field. Okay. Now I could go in why that's not technically correct, but I might confuse you all. But just remember, the lower the f-stop number, the shallower the depth of field. So when we make decisions, if we know depth of field is a shallow depth of field is what we want, we're going to start with these rules to manipulate it as best we can. All right. So, and here's an example that f2 on the left is actually a shallow depth of field where things are out of focus. And we go up to aperture f22, and now we got much more in focus. So, and these are decisions we make, right? So, and there's times where we do both. We want a shallow depth of field and we don't. So, when would you want a less or a shallow depth of field? What do you think, Doug?
Yeah, I'll just step in. I keep going back to storytelling, right, and telling the story. And so you may want your background to be blurred and have more of a shallow depth of field if you want to really focus on the person in the foreground of the scene. And that is your main point, and you're just the background is a sub part of that, a subplot in a sense when it comes to the shot. And you go back and forth, in some programs you'll see the focus would change and bring the background in focus and the foreground back and forth. There's a commercial I remember seeing exactly like that, shooting through a car window, and they brought the person in the passenger seat in focus and the driver's seat out of focus back and forth because of that reason. So again, I just think it has a lot to do with storytelling and utilizing the full frame of the shot.
And to
Yeah.
build off, I'm sorry, and to build off that, like, I also think, what kind of story are you telling? Are you telling a news story, a feature, whatever? Because if it's a news story and you're a reporter and there's protests happening behind you, you want that.
That's
you want
right.
that, right? But if you're doing a feature and let's say it's something emotional or something, you might want to convey it. You might want to blow that out in the background just to your subject has more importance on it. It's the storytelling, like Michael said. It's just tools.
Exactly. And how about even a more practical way? You're on a gimbal.
Yeah.
You're moving around. The subject's moving. Why would you want such a shallow depth of field that they're going to go in and out of focus all the time?
Exactly.
You know, give yourself a shot, you know, to keep something in focus if you know you're doing a move or something like that. Because listen, we're, you know, most of you, and especially with these DSLR type cameras, rack and focus and follow focus is not easy to do. So now let's talk about lenses, right? So we're making choices. We make choices about everything. So the different lenses are going to do different things. The wide angle lenses and the telefocal lenses, not only is it going to zoom in to see something from farther away and all that kind of stuff, but it changes the aspect ratio. I mean, the angle of the shot and what's in the shot. So we've had a little scene here with the hat from the same framing of the hat, same size, but with these different lenses. Obviously, had to move the lenses back for that 200 millimeter. But look at the background, how it changes not only the focus, but what you see in the background. Yep. So I think we have a video that my interns in 2021 created next, if we could watch that real quick. And it kind of really shows the different lenses and the effects.
In this video, we're going to show you how different focal lengths look with the same framing and f-stop. We're going to use the Rokinon Cinema lenses, which will give us a nice shallow depth of field. A wide lens like this Rokinon 14mm gives an exaggeration of features on the subject and can also be used to get right up close with your subject and still maintain focus. With the 35mm Rokinon lens on, to maintain the same framing, the camera must back up. Notice that the background is getting more blurred and the subject's features are getting less exaggerated. Now, with the 50mm, we step even further back to maintain the same framing. The background gets blurrier and we see less of it. Also, the subject's face begins to get wider. Finally, with the 85mm Rokinon, you'll get even a more shallow depth of field and the background gets blurrier, making the subject stand out more. Each of these lenses can be used in different ways and portray different emotions. It's up to you to make the choice of which lens suits your next project best.
So I'm going to come back to Omar real quick. Do you have a go-to lens that you recommend with your kids?
First of all, the Rokinon starter kit is the best thing anyone could purchase. If you have the money, if it's around $1,500 to $2,000, right? If you have the money, that is a great starter kit for anyone. I'm a 50mm. That's my prime lens that I love to shoot with. But if my go-to lens, my glass that I love using for my DSLRs is that 24-70 red ring Canon. I mean, that's so versatile that you could pretty much, if I needed to just take one lens on a trip with me, that would be my lens that I'd use.
That's funny. We're going to actually discuss a little bit about the telephoto or zoom lenses versus prime lenses.
Right.
If the background is busy like a city street, is it best to focus the subject and keep the background out of focus, or does that matter universally? Well, I don't know. Are you trying to show a busy background, or are you trying to just focus on this person and the background's a distraction? So this is what I mean by the choices we make. And it depends on the story and what you're trying to accomplish. It's all about how do I want the audience to feel when they watch this shot? What kind of emotions am I trying to give? What information I try to give? So that depends. You know,
it's a great question, because I feel like kids want a rule book. They want a book of like, if I just do this, this, and this, and this, I'm gonna get it right. And it's not like that. You have to. A lot of what we do is art. You know, we could teach the broadcast side of it. We could teach film, but you have to have some kind of an art side of you to realize this will look cool, or, you know, and something that might not look cool to me might look cool to a 17, 18-year-old. And it all depends on who your audience is for your story. So Isabella, like, I would tell you, what story are you telling and who do you want to affect when you're telling that story? And that's the answer to that question.
That's where you got to start thinking. you have to start thinking, what am I trying to accomplish with this shot? How am I trying to make the audience feel? What am I trying to tell them? How can I use my camera to do that as well, besides what's being said? So you said a zoom. Obviously, a zoom can go from different focal lengths, like you said, 70 to 28. It's very versatile, very convenient. So yes, they also get very expensive when you try to get to a low f-stop to get these shallow depth of fields, because you have this lens has to be able to do an f-stop at different length, at different focals, so it's more glass, it's more expense. Where a prime lens is a fixed focal length, like a 50 millimeter, 25 millimeter, whatever. They're usually sharper because you're not dealing with all that glass. And they're also what we would call faster. In other words, you can get to that lower f-stop and do a shallower depth of field. So these are decisions. We make decisions about everything. I'm doing a news story. I'm running and gunning. Yeah, I might want to just throw my zoom. I sacrifice some depth of field in some situations, but I got more flexibility. I'm doing my sit-down interview. I want it to look beautiful. I pull out my Rokinon 50 millimeter or 85 millimeter, shallow depth of field, sharp as a tack. It's all manual. So focus has to be set manually and all that. You don't have the flexibility that these others do. But, man, my shot's going to look great if that's what I'm trying to do, right? So these are always decisions, deliberate. When do I use? What should I bring? Do I need lights? We're always thinking. We're kind of running a little short on time, so we're going to move on unless there's something you want to add, Michael, to that.
No, that's absolutely. Back to that earlier question, though, and I think Omar mentioned it about like news. You know, if you have a busy city street and it's a news piece, a lot of times for TV, a lot of stuff is in focus. Like almost everything is in focus. When you get into really focusing in on the story, that's when you really realize the background is blurred out to bring focus to the to the foreground. So
yeah, and some of this with the equipment they're using, if we get to, those video cameras aren't going to have the same sensors, they're using different lenses, they're not getting the shallow depth of field and all that. But again, we're thinking about all of this, and we're thinking before we show up on the set or the scene or whatever. So manual or autofocus, I know it's a thing. Some teachers stress, no, you got to get used to shooting manually to get you used to if you were a running good videographer and all that kind of stuff. But autofocus has developed pretty quickly. I see cases for both, but you should try both, right?
What's that meme? Everyone's a cameraman until you put it on M. Everyone can shoot until you put the camera on that manual setting, and then we separate the pros from the amateurs. So
yeah, take it off the green box. Show me what you got, right? Okay, so let's move on to some of the more fun, creative side of things, and we're talking about exposure and lighting. All right, let's get into a little bit of nuts and bolts really quick on this next one: exposure triangle, the triangle of exposure. So there's three variables that are going to influence your exposure of a shot. In other words, your brightness or darkness, right? So obviously the aperture, the iris, it's measuring f-stops. Open it up with an f16, or I'm sorry, close it down with an f16, and you're letting less light in. Open it up, and those f2.8, you're letting more light in. We can adjust the brightness and darkness. The shutter as well. That's that on those little mirrored cameras that opens up and exposes and closes, and we can adjust the speed of that, right? Fast shutter to catch somebody running really quick, a slower shutter to have someone with that firework where it does the kind of blur because it's been open longer and things are moved, and you can get that burning in of the fireworks. And then the ISO I'm an old guy. We used to buy film, and we'd buy certain ISOs knowing what we're going to do. We're going to be out on the beach. We're getting an ISO 100 because it doesn't, it'll work well in that bright sunlight. We're shooting my daughter's play. I'm going to get an ISO 3200. What I want you guys to think of now today for an ISO, though, it's like taking a still image, throwing it in Photoshop, and brightening and darkening. It's all electronics nowadays. But what I'm always explaining to students, and this is how I teach it, Omar, and I'm not, so you might be different on this, but I'm telling the students we're making decisions, right? The first decision is the shutter. Normal motion is going to be double the shutter speed to your frame rate. So if you're shooting in 30 frames a second, you set your shutter to 1/60th, your motion is going to be normal. You're not going to influence because shutter affects the video, right? Yep. And we don't want to affect the video for the most part. Next decision is, do I want a shallow depth of field? So we get to that aperture and that f-stop, right? We made that decision. So now that we've made those decisions, I tell my students, use that ISO to brighten and darken to set the exposure to where it looks properly. Yes, if you get to too high of an ISO, you'll get some grain, just like if you did in Photoshop and had a dark picture, you had to brighten up, right? In that case, you should bring in lights or whatever you need to do. So that's kind of how I teach it, because the decisions are going to be normal video with my shutter speed, aperture for my depth of field, and then I'll use my ISO to kind of work it in. And some of these cameras are really, really good with these things. Now, so we talk about that. We're going to do a scene. What are some of these thoughts we need to prepare beforehand for these situations? If we know we're going to be inside, if we know we want to shoot in front of a window, all these kind of things.
Listen, failing to prepare is preparing to fail when you're a videographer. So if you haven't run down your shot list and the things you need and the kind of story you want to tell, and you go to the scene or wherever and you don't have the gear, that's on you. That's a large part of being a cinematographer.
Yep. And are you outdoors? Are you indoors? These are making a huge difference in what you're doing. So let's get into lighting, right? Which, the painting with light. So lighting has 4 attributes to work with. This is what we have 4 things we think about when we think about lighting. The direction, where do we place the light? From what angle? Where's it, how's it hitting our subject? The quality, soft, hard, spot. How are we going to adjust that quality of light? We're doing interviews. Do you really want a spotlight on the person and so forth? You're doing a film. If we look at these on the pictures I have, the one on the top left is actually a student film.
Phenomenal student film.
Yeah. And really paid attention to the lighting to add to the scene. That was a morning shot through the window. That's why you've got that orange color. The spotlight below on the right of the guy, the lower below angle shot. It's obviously going to be some kind of intense scene. And then, you got your basic interview with that little light on the kind of using as a motivation with a far side key, which we're going to talk about. But anyway, so we've got direction, quality, which is soft or hard, intensity, how bright, how low, what do we need? Are we battling a window behind us? Are we not? And then color. So that's basically it that we have control over with our lighting. But we think about all 4 of these, right? And they have to work together to create, to guide our attention, to create texture, visual impact, and create an atmosphere, right? And the Aaliyah one's a great example of an atmosphere they built.
I feel we should bring Chuck Rivera and Jody in here from West Broward High School, because the way they teach lighting and their student films are amazing. And they could tell a story in one room, just by the light changing, because it's excellent.
And it's hard to get to, right? In the classroom, I bet, hard to get to that.
It's because we're structured. We have our classroom. We can't really build up different environments. So going out into the field and testing these things out is really the only way you're going to learn it.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think also just really using light, again, to help tell the story and shaping, moving light around on a person's face, or shaping the face, or taking away shadows underneath. It just depends on how you're using it in an interview situation, a sit down interview. If you want to really, really bring the focus in, it may be a dark or kind of interview dealing with some heavy subject matter, and maybe the background being black and really focused on that individual with the lighting really helps. Or it might be a brighter, I don't know, happy Christmassy time, and you want to lighten up the whole space, and just really using light for that, and never forgetting about using natural light and sunlight and light through windows, and just using all these different light modifiers to help really tell your story. It's not always about just the dedicated 3-point kind of interview light with your key and fill and backlight. It's light even in the background. So that bottom shot, with having that tree or whatever in the background, Beautiful. That's kind of lit, it adds to the story.
Yep.
So I think using everything that's available to you for lighting, not just your main 3-point setup lighting.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit, hopefully about time, about motivated lights, So real quick, for the window, would it make it different if curtains were half closed, closing off some light, or it wouldn't help? Of course it would.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course it would. And sometimes you close the windows just because you don't have a big enough light to battle it.
Mm-hmm.
Or the shadow. All of it. Of course it does. Yeah, it's going to.
Or you could get some diffusion and put on the window as well. If you have, I go back to that story I was telling earlier. That was actually, we really wanted the outside to show through that light, but by not planning, we sort of missed the ball there when it came to that, and we lost out on that. But having diffusion, having more lights, and try to not overpower the sun if you could do that. But that's
to
another
battle it.
goal.
Yeah, that sun's the brightest light in the world, right?
Absolutely.
And it takes up the challenge. So let's talk briefly 3-point lighting. You probably heard it. I don't know if you've been taught it too much. Your key light, that's your main light. That's going to be the one that's going to be the brightest in the scene. Your fill light is the other side of the key. That's where you fill in that area. That's going to be dark. And then your backlight, which I know kids kind of drop the ball on the backlight, but it's really important. It causes that separation, that little light on the shoulder, or some people call it a rim light or kick light that sometimes will catch the cheek from the opposite side of the key light where the fill light is. It's huge. It adds depth. We're talking about depth. It creates it. The person doesn't look two-dimensional. So let's move next. Really quick, I want to talk about the key light because you make choices with that, right? Especially with an interview. So there's 3 places you could put that key light. All right. You can put a near side key. If you look at the picture, that's with the light on. So, okay. The picture's on the right. The guy is looking to his left, right? So we're putting it on the near side of the camera. So that bright side is on the front side of the camera and the dark shadow on the far side, right? You could put it the opposite way on the backside key, where now you're making that the backside brighter and the front side is more your fill light. Or you could have a frontal key where you just blast them. Maybe you don't have a lot of lights, so you just kind of need a soft light in the middle to kind of pick him up. This does a lot. This is a big choice you're making, right? So maybe your interview isn't as intense. Maybe you just want that frontal key, more of that pretty light straight on, maybe not necessarily directly in his face, but a little off, but mostly frontal. I'm a big backside key person. I like to do the far side key and then fill with which is the larger side of the face, and fill with that. I just think it looks prettier. And now what we're doing here is we're using that key light as the motivator for all the other lights. We set that key light and then we adjust our fill light depending on the subject. So 50 to 75% intensity to the key light is kind of general, but there's where you make your adjustments, right? So a more moody scene, we might dim down that fill light to add more shadows and more intensity to the scene. And on the opposite side, it's a bright, just the person talking. It's not moody. We're picking them both up. It's maybe closer to 100 to 85%. So there's still a little texture, but the person's lit all the way through, right? Decisions. I'll
tell you this: for younger high school kids and middle school kids, master your front key first. Yeah. Make sure you know how to light someone up, and especially skin tone, because darker skin tones will need more light. Lighter skin tones, you might want to back it off because you'll get a shiny forehead. So that you got to understand frontal light. Once you master it, then you can start playing with the mood of the light after that. But you got to, for the younger kids, especially for college kids and professionals, listen, at this point, you got to use your tools you have to tell a story. But for high school kids and middle school kids, make sure you know how to light someone up the right way first.
And as soft, if you're going to do that frontal, as soft as possible. Have some diffusion in front of that light. It needs to be so you don't want to blast somebody with a spotlight right in their face. It's that should be a beauty light, but if you're blasting them with this harsh spotty light, well, you're taking away all that beauty, right? And sometimes be conscious as well of the lighting in the environment. Don't stand them under a fluorescent light. Move them that lighting. Is there specific lighting equipment you would recommend to student filmmakers? A 3-light kit if possible. That depends what you're doing. Filmmakers, at least a 3-light kit, soft. The ability to go soft or hard would be nice.
Amazon relatively cheap as well.
Yeah, GVM makes a nice 3-light kit. I almost recommend getting the RGB ones now, and then you have all the flexibility in the world. You can go colors. You can really dial things in. Would natural density filters help when shooting out a window? I'm going to get to that shortly, Jason. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, almost. Okay, so motivating light. We talked a little bit about, using that room and scouting the room and deciding where you're going to put them. Well, I like to use motivated light personally. It just is more natural. So if you have a window in the room, use it. That one on the top right is probably a window coming through to her. But not only is the light from the window affecting the shot, it's also affecting how you light. If I know I have a window in the background, I'm going to now know that's where my key light's coming from because that's what would naturally happen, right? So we want it to be natural. We don't want to key from the opposite side of the window because that's really weird and odd. That's not how it looks really lit. So use those things as motivation. If you have a lamp in the shot, Well, that has now become the place where your key light is going to come in, because you're going to use that. I mean, the girl here with the little basket, the little on the top, bottom left with the little, that's, subconsciously, that's your motivated light that's now put your key on that left side of her. And it just seems natural to us subconsciously. Oh, that makes sense. It doesn't seem fake, right? Again, it's kind of the planning, looking at the room. What am I trying to accomplish, right?
Yeah, and it's the balance between those as well. Sometimes you wouldn't want the light in the background to be overpowering and take away focus from something else. So that's important as well. All of those motivating lights and using them in the right way.
And look for that stuff. Put a lamp in, if you'd like to, depending on what you're trying to do. And just real quick, the person with the curtain thing as well. On a previous slide, when we did the interview shots, I had, it's way back. You don't have to go there. We had the woman, it was a close up and a wide shot, but the window was right behind her, right? So in a perfect world, you've scouted location, but even if you haven't, that becomes a challenge, because you've got that big bright light that you have to compete against. And what I mean by compete against is that's a big bright light that your camera's adjusting to. Now you have to bring the subject up to almost to that level to be able to see them properly, correct? Yes. So you need to bring the lights accordingly, or to go back to the other questions, maybe you close, if you got like sheer blinds, you close them up a little bit so that it softens. Now it's not as bright of a light. So, okay, let's go to the next one. Outdoor lighting. This is a challenge. It can be, so outdoor shooting outdoors can be the easiest thing you do or the hardest thing you do. It's an overcast day. You've got this big, beautiful, soft light coming from the sky. Yeah, everything looks fantastic. Wow, that was simple. All right. That's not how it always works, right? So if you get a harsh sunlight and you're at 11:30 in the day and it's above their head and you got this blasted spotlight from the top of their head, it's a challenge, right? So someone said an ND filter. So an ND filter it's a neutral density filter. It's kind of like putting sunglasses in front of your camera. Now, I'm going to be shooting outside. I'm going to be doing interviews outside. There's things I need to bring, my preparation, right? Light modifiers, reflectors or diffusion. The reflector is going to be that hard, either silver or white side that you put below a bounce light on people, or the diffusion, which we have a shot of it, which is like a silk that we put over them so the sun isn't hitting them directly and it softens them up. You're making decisions on what you're trying to do, right? And some of those decisions where the sun's going to be. We position people where the sun. I tend to lean towards like using it as a backlight and either softening it or bouncing it to fill, depending. That's generally like to be, but not always.
Living in South Florida, if they're like $30. If you don't own one of those diffusers, you're not doing yourself justice, because you're gonna have to pull every trick in the book if you don't have that thing. To me, it's like a cheat code. If I have one of my students just put one of those diffusers in the right spot to dim that light, your shot will automatically get like 10 to 20% better just by using that.
Yeah, and the diffusion too. The diffusion really just helps. In that shot where the gentleman's holding it, it makes it an even look across the face. It really helps make your image a lot better and prettier in the shot, because having harsh light and shadows coming across from the sun, especially if it's right above at 12 o'clock, that could be a killer. So just really using modifiers to really help with that as well. And like you mentioned, the ND filters, if you're out, but that's the total light that's your scene overall. You're cutting the light overall. But if you need to modify a certain area, that's when you need to use the other tools.
So let me touch that real quick, because Jason had a question about Jason Fernandez, neutral density filters when shooting in front of a window. So neutral density filters are nice in the sense that, okay, we talked about depth of field, right? And to get a shallow depth of field, we need to go to an F2. Well, an F2 is actually letting more light in. So you're outdoors, you want to shoot a shallow depth of field, but if you go to an F2 where you've got all this light hitting your lens, but it's just way too bright, your camera can't handle it. So you're like, well, shucks. What do I do? Well, a lot of kids go in there and start dialing out that shutter speed and start messing with the video motion, right? Well, no, a neutral density filter is putting sunglasses, and now you can have this and still get that shallow depth of field. So you're doing interviews outside and you have an ND filter, it better be with you, because you're probably going to use it if you want that shallow depth of field, right? Now, real quick, this is the nice thing on down below. We've got the difference between a reflector and a no reflector. So, and time of day, all of that factor. You got a sun coming up from above. You probably are going to want to use a diffusion over there to soften everything because they're getting blasted from above. But if you wanted to use that light, the sunlight as a backlight, maybe it's 10 o'clock in the morning where it's not completely up the center of the sky. It's more in an angle. It's actually a nice angle for a backlight, right? But if you notice on the right, that backlight's overpowering everything. You don't have any light in your face. That's when a reflector comes in to bounce. And it's kind of a nice little shot, but it depends on what you're trying to do, what time of day you're shooting, and all of those things. So what is the perfect hour, at least recommended for outdoor lighting? Well, yeah, you've got your beauty time. The
golden hour. I mean, who doesn't want to shoot a golden hour?
Yeah, it'd be great if you can.
Yeah.
But sometimes that golden hour doesn't work. Maybe your scene is in a film is like just a bad things happening to him. You don't want it to be beautiful, right? So now you're battling that golden hour. Sometimes you're shooting a news story. You're there when that thing's happening, so you don't have control on that. So again, it's all decisions, and there's no set rule. It's just a matter of adjusting to your environment, making decisions. What am I trying to accomplish? What kind of feelings am I trying to give the audience? All those, what information am I trying to give as well? Just real quick, back to depth of field. I always use this example because students love to use shallow depth of field all the time, and I get it. It looks really cool. Establishing shot of a classroom. Do I want a shallow depth of field? No, I want to see everybody. Maybe I cut then to a shot of a shallow depth of field of the girl in the front who's my main subject. So now we're telling a story with just our camera. Here we are in this classroom. Here is who you need to pay attention to as we used our shallow depth of field in the same room with the same lighting, with the same everything, and just doing some manipulation to tell a story or manipulate the audience to look at where we want them to look, right? I missed that last question. What was that? Depending on the skin tone, would you recommend changing the warmth or coldness of the light from CCNN? Of course. That light color is part of our 4 decisions, right? Skin tone is important. That's where we build it all. In a general, we're not trying to do an artistic shot. We want the skin tones to look good. We start there. We want them to. We don't want blue, or I'm looking a little red right now. Actually, I should fix that. Those kind of. So yeah, the color is part of our 4 decisions and the things we're making decisions about and choices and changes, right?
We can do a whole hour on gear and cameras and stuff. Honestly.
Yeah.
I'm going to wrap it up in one sentence, and you guys might not disagree. All of these cameras you're buying is going to have good video.
Yep.
Some of them are going to have better lenses. Some of them are going to have better, give you 4K, get higher frame rates. Some are going to have, yeah, right, exactly. Some of them are going to be more expensive. Some of them are going to be able to do all kinds of things, shallower depth of field, that kind of stuff. I'm telling you right now, they're all going to look pretty darn good. You're going to be able to do a lot with them. I'm way more concerned, and we don't talk about in this, and I'm trying to cheat from this, that sound is more important than video.
It is.
It is. So
I agree.
I recommend getting one with a headphone jack. That, I criticize students all the time on sound, and then we throw them out there in the field and they go blind with a Canon T7i with no headphone jack, and they're recording without having any idea, or they have a phone in their pocket. Some people are good, they get a Zoom or
a Zoom. I am such a big proponent of the H4s and the H6s. If you can swing that, it doesn't matter about the headphone jack. You can sync your audio afterwards in post, but Zoom audio comes out and it makes it so much easier for you to control your audio.
Except now they have to sync and post.
Yes.
Somebody have to operate the audio and listen to it, and that's fine. And it's going to get great sound. It's going to be better than the sound the cameras probably anyway. But it's another person. It's another skill. Yep. It's another step. If you get a camera with headphone jacks, now you can listen yourself as you're recording. So I love the Sony A7 III for a variety of reasons, just to be able to control it. I can teach that to a student in 15 minutes with the way I have the dials set that they can control everything. And it's got a headphone jack. Now that's expensive, coming at $2,000. That's out of some people's price range. I get it. Plus lenses. Canon 80D 90D is a good suggestion. Again, now we're about $1,200-ish with a kit lens.
Yeah.
Canon now has the RP, which is a mirrorless version. I think I'm really intrigued by that camera.
Those are crazy. Those are
and they're full frame, where the 80D and 90D is cropped. In other words, the image is going to be cropped, which means that the same lens is going to be tighter on that than it would be on another one. And if we remember from our lessons, the tighter the lens, so a 50 millimeter looks like an 85 millimeter. So anyway, long story short, I can get shallower depth of field with a full frame lens. Sony ZV-E10 is a cool one because it's $800 and that has a headphone jack. And then I was told a Panasonic G95 as well, under $1,000. That's where I go. I could debate mirrorless, DSLR, full frame, cropped brands. To me, get a headphone jack first.
Yeah, and I would just say, start where you are. I mean, it's great to have all the different gear and spend money here and there on lenses and different cameras and all of that stuff.
Yep.
Start with your phone. Start with wherever you are. You just start there. Work on your framing. Work on depth of field. Work on your lighting techniques. If you don't have the right, if you don't have the lights to buy, you go outside, shoot under a tree, do whatever you need to do to just keep shooting, keep making mistakes, keep learning from those mistakes, and keep going. That's all I would say.
And they have apps for the cameras, for the phone cameras, to operate just like a camera. F-stop, you can adjust all that stuff.
Filmic Pro app.
Absolutely.
Get the Filmic Pro app, and that could give you everything you need. And just practice storytelling. Practice.
We're going to wrap it up, but just real quick, when I went in the industry, it was film. And Seattle Filmworks actually sold 35 millimeter motion picture film for stills. I bought that. That's where I practiced all my lighting. I couldn't afford shooting in 16 millimeter, 35 millimeter film. I practiced with stills. Same concept, you're still lighting. You're just doing it in one stop as opposed to motion. So I don't know. I thought that was a pretty good little presentation. I know we went through a lot. Hopefully it made sense to everyone. Just real quick pitch from me. One of the shows that I think you should be interested in that I produce is Shortcuts. It's a student films show. I highly recommend this. Even though it's high school films, some of the college kids in here, I'm telling you, you'll learn from these high school filmmakers here in South Florida. And we learn from watching. And the nice thing about that show is this is peers that are doing this. Quentin Tarantino, I could do a whole hour on that, but that's a different world.
Right.
This is you. So you can watch not only what the students are doing well, but what they are doing incorrect so that you don't make the same mistakes. Omar, anything you'd like to add here at the end?
I would just tell you, if you're a student in middle school or in high school, grab whatever you have, shoot, bring it to your professor, email it to me if you want. I love helping others out. Practice your storytelling and everything else will start falling into place. If you know how to tell a story, you're going to know how to light, you're going to know how to frame, you're going to know how to do your audio better. But everything, it doesn't matter what gear you have, to be honest. Like, you can shoot an amazing story off an iPhone, but shoot. Just go out there and shoot, because that's the only way you're going to get better.
Yes.
And Michael?
I would just leave something too. If there's any high school students in the Miami-Dade County School District that's interested in TV production and an internship at WLRN, if you're able to get here and you're within the area, we have a high school internship program, and we're always looking for individuals that want to learn and practice filmmaking and video storytelling on a regular basis. And I'll also leave, like Alfred Hitchcock said, because I really love his films, but what really matters is what's on the screen. So really focusing on how it looks on the screen. It could be a lot of mess around you, but really focus on what's coming through your lens and what's on the screen. So I'll leave it there.
So I just want to say, be deliberate, make choices, prepare beforehand. You never just show up blind. You start thinking about shots, about situations you need to deal with. 80% of your work should go into pre-production. I don't care what you're doing. People think news stories, they just show up and do it. That's not true. It's not how it's done. You're prepared. Your camera person, your producer, everybody's on the same page, knowing what they want to do, knowing what they need to bring, all that kind of stuff. That's what really, really matters. So, okay. So next on October 8th, for you guys, we have a rebroadcast. The Suncoast is spotlighting another webinar that they did on mobile journalism, the new media frontier. This was a good one. I saw it originally when it was done. So 11 a.m. October 8th is a rebroadcast. I highly recommend it. And then, of course, listen, let's have fun. Let's win some awards. Let's try. Let's compete. It's all about experience, right? So when you're shooting these things and doing these things, but it's nice to be rewarded as well. So late January 2023 is the call for entries for the Student Production Awards. They take high school and college. I highly recommend it. Plus, it's a really fun event at the end of the year. The award show is a blast. It's just you celebrate the end of the year with everybody and just acknowledge all the work that's being done. I'm Jim Garashi. There's our handles, Mike Anderson from WLRN and Omar Delgado, the GOAT from CCNN. It's been great. And hopefully this has been helpful for you guys.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Suncoast Student Production Awards Committee, thank you for joining us. For more information about our awards, scholarships, or future webinars, go to suncoastchapter.org.